Now let's look at adding an entirely new component type altogether. So if we browse into Types and Component Types, we can right-click Component Types and go Add Component Type, which adds a new record here. For example, let's call it a requirement. Now that's added the component type itself, but of course, in the same way as before, we could add new properties. For example, let's add an information property called the statement or something like that, and leave it as a text field. So we've now got a single property called statement with a freeform text value. We can change the icon for a new type simply by right-clicking and going Change Icon here. That will let us choose from any image format that we have. Now, with new component types, we probably want to define some constraints about the way that they can be used. So simply right-click and Add Constraint. Here we have 4 different types of constraints that we can create. Now, of particular interest to a new component type may be that it must be attached to a certain type of connection. So let's create that type of constraint here, saying that the source end of a requirement must be attached to a implemented by connection type like this. What we're saying here is that if a requirement exists, we should, in this case, have an implemented by connection to it, saying that a requirement should be implemented by something. Now constraints are shown under the type, like this. Here we can see this new constraint implemented by. Now the color of the padlock is yellow, which implies that it's a warned constraint. We can always double click the constraint and open the dialog to see its details here. That is again that the requirement type should be connected to the source end of any implemented by connections. Let's now create a catalog for this new requirement type. We click the toolbar button here, choose the architecture, in this case 2012 actual, choose the element type, requirement, and here we have the start of a requirements catalog. Let's add some new columns. We click the new columns here, go into properties, and show that statement field that we added. But let's also add an attachment column. Now this is showing the various things that can be at the other end of the implemented by connection. So why don't we choose application here? Give us a little bit more space. Now we could start to add records to this. Again, click the plus button here, and we've got a new requirement. Now, of course, we're thrown errors here to indicate that according to the constraints, we don't have completeness. And that is that we don't, for example, have a statement, or we don't, for example, have an application. But either way, let's put in some values here, some text, and let's right-click now to add an application. So let's choose, say, ERP HRM here, and that has now completed this requirement to say that it has some statement and that it's being implemented by this application.